I was 14 or 15 at the time, and I was hanging out with some friends. We were at my friend Kevin's house when we decided to take a walk because we were all obsessed with health and the gym at the time. All three of us got our shoes on and headed out. About 15 minutes into our walk, Kevin points out that a car we had seen a few minutes ago was still behind us. We looked and we all recognized it. It was an old Toyota we had seen a little while ago. We all got a little nervous and decided to pick up the pace. The car still followed us closely behind. We decided to run into the woods to try and lose this person. We all ran and found a few trees that were perfect for us to climb up. We each chose a different tree and sat there in the branches. We heard the car's motor shut off and the door slam shut. Soon, we heard footsteps coming closer to us. I began to panic and I looked around the area. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something. A man walked through the area where we were, right under me. He was holding a long object, but it was too dark to tell what it was. A few minutes after the man had passed under us, I signaled to my friends that we should drop from the trees and make a break for it. We ran all the way back to Kevin's house, looking behind our shoulders every few minutes. We were not followed and never saw that car or its owner again. But about 3 days after this happened, I was watching the news with my little sister and we saw a case in my area about a boy close to my age being taken and to be on the lookout for a person driving a 2005 Toyota. I'm not sure if these two events were connected, but I really think they are. It's now 5 years after this happened, and the boy still hasn't been found. Alright, for context, I was about 5 or 6 at the time, and the tank was in my parents' room. I had a goldfish that I named Goldie, a classic fish name. I remember going up to this fish every single day after school and poking at the glass. I even remember the color of the gravel. It was turquoise blue mixed with gray. One day, after I came home, my post-toddler self decided it would be a great idea to grab a sippy cup and dunk that shit into the tank. I was moving the cup around in the water in an effort to get the fish inside of the cup. I did it once or twice before deciding to stop. The next day, Goldie was gone. I asked my parents about it, and they said that Goldie had died. I was sad, but I wasn't too broken up about it, as I was 5 and didn't really care for the fish. A few years later, I remembered the fish and asked my mom about it. I told her all about how I used to just stare at the fish, about the sippy cup, and how I even recalled the tank being in the corner of the room. She just stared at me with a bewildered face. "You've never had a fish?" I was quite surprised, and even went to ask my dad and my grandparents, but they all told me the same thing. I never had a fish. Okay, so I get these submitted a lot, where people have these very vivid memories of people or pets or objects, whatever, and one day, these things just apparently never existed at all. Sometimes other people remember them too, sometimes they're the only one, but usually they just have to move on because the only logical explanation is that it was a false memory. Either way, it's very weird stuff, and it's gotta be kind of unsettling to go through. This happened a few years ago when we just moved into a new house. A few days in, I went for a walk to the shops. On the way there, I had to walk through a heavily residential area, loads of houses and streets. All of a sudden, for a split second, all the houses were gone and all I saw was field. It occurred so quickly, and the houses were back before I had even taken in what happened. But it was enough to completely stop me in my tracks. I even walked back to see if I'd happened to walk past a big picture of a field or something, but no. The houses didn't even have front lawns, only driveways. Sometime later, I spoke to a friend of a friend who knows the area very well. I asked him when the houses in the area were built, to which he replied the 50s mainly, but some in the 60s. I then asked him what was there before the houses were built, to which he answered, it was all field. Has anyone else experienced something like this? I think I saw the past right in front of me for a split second. Okay, so this is something that happened to me around a year ago, and I still think about it from time to time, even though sometimes I wish I didn't. A little context before anything else. In 2020, my mom and dad were having some marital issues and ended up having a divorce. It really did hit me like a truck, and I started getting severely depressed. I started going to therapy to figure myself out and got some medications prescribed to me. But my therapist also advised me to indulge in physical exercise, among other things that might help with my mental and emotional state. Now, I was never an active person physically, so at first, I didn't really follow through with that. But in 2021, I decided it was about time I started doing something. So 1 to 2 times a week, I went on late-night jogs. There's this road near my neighborhood that leads to a nearby park of sorts. I would usually jog from my house to the entrance of this park, then make my way back, and that was it. The reason I went late at night is because I'm a very socially awkward person and was always afraid I'd stumble onto something jogging along the same path I did if I went any time earlier. I also just enjoyed the solitude. Apart from the occasional car traveling along the road, there really were no other people around at the time I went for these jogs, which was usually around 10 p.m. At first, it was pretty relaxing, and it really did make me feel better. That is, until something weird started happening. To the side of this road, there were these vast cornfields. Along the main road, there was this little dirt road to the side that I assume led to a farm or plantation of some kind, thus all the corn. But regardless of that, every time I went by that dirt road in my jogs, I always felt eyes on me. Like something was watching me from further down the road, but I just couldn't see it because it was too dark. At first, I just brushed it off as me being the paranoid ass that I am, but despite that, that feeling never really went away. Then, one day, something even weirder happened. I was jogging as always, and eventually reached the dirt road. I was already preparing myself to just brush the feeling off. But as soon as I jog by the road, I hear something shuffling among the corn, and I freeze in place. I immediately turn towards the sound, and it also just stops. I stand there for a solid minute. I really did start to freak out a little, and for some reason, I instinctively let out a shaky, "Hello?" And to my surprise, I get an answer. I hear a voice talk back to me, a very monotone, "Hello." The thing is, the voice that I hear is my voice. There was no mistaking it. Whatever was hiding in the corn had my voice, and it answered me. At that point, I just turn around and book it back home. I was having none of it. When I eventually did get home, my mom was in the kitchen and asked me why I looked so shaken. I didn't tell her about what happened and just said I was tired from the jog. I didn't really go to sleep that night. 2 weeks passed without me going on jogs anymore. Honestly, after what happened, I was afraid to even go outside, so I just stayed home most of the time and helped my mom with chores to keep myself somewhat active. Then, one night, during the weekend, I'm in my room playing some games by myself, and my mom is in her room watching Netflix as she usually does. When all of a sudden, I can clearly hear someone call my mother's name coming from the backyard, and just like before, it had my voice. My heart sank. I could hear my mom opening the door to her room and stepping out of it, and in a panic, I dash out of my room and go over to her. I stop her in the hallway, and she can clearly see I'm freaking the hell out. She looks concerned and asks me if I was okay and if I called her. I just shake my head and mumble out the words, "That wasn't me, Mom." We both just stared at each other for a few seconds, and I could clearly tell she had no idea what was going on, so instead of going outside, we just locked the house up and kinda tried to forget about what had just happened. That was another night where I couldn't sleep, and in the next morning, I gathered the courage to go to my backyard and check for any signs that something had been there. There was nothing. Alright, I think I've already mentioned this a couple times, but these doppelganger stories are some of the freakiest ones in my opinion. Especially since I get these submitted to me, all the time. A lot of people have gone through this. According to several different legends, there are these mimic creatures, or these doppelgangers, whatever you want to call them, and apparently they're able to mimic the faces and the voices of people you know, whether they be friends or loved ones, and their whole objective is to either get you to come outside or to get you to let them in. The house I grew up in was at one point a schoolhouse in the very late 1800s into the early 1900s, eventually being converted, I think, in the 30s. Before that, we had learned through the grapevine and some records that there was a high likelihood that it was also native land. Anyway, this was a decently sized house, but it was single level. I found out years later that there was an upstairs that was never finished, but you had to crawl through an access door in the roof to get to it. The only set of stairs in the house were the ones that led down into the decrepit basement. This was only accessible from outside. There were no stairs in the main level of this house, and there never were. One night, when I was very young, maybe 4 or 5 years old, I had a dream. I had a dream that there were these old concrete stairs in what was mine and my sister G's bedroom at the time. That room had a door that led to the garage and a single window on the wall perpendicular. The stairs were painted, but the paint was peeling, and it had multiple layers. I can still visualize them so clearly. The outermost layer was a puckering white, and the layer underneath was a minty green, cracked, old, and peeling. Strangest of all, they led nowhere. The top just led straight into the ceiling. I remember in the dream staring at them, a bit confused. It felt like I was being pulled in. I had to touch them. I wanted to go up them, even though it made no sense. But I resisted. I had this odd feeling that if I did, something bad would happen. I woke abruptly in a daze. I stumbled out into the kitchen and asked my mom where the stairs went, as they weren't in my room anymore. I was never the type of kid to make shit up, so she looked at me in confusion and asked, "What stairs? The basement stairs?" I said, "No, the painted concrete stairs in my room." My mom just stared at me and said, "There's no stairs in your room. There's never been stairs inside." I dropped it, feeling weird. It stuck with me for years, and sometimes I'd just stare at that corner and get weirded out. It felt so real. Fast forward many years later, and I'm a young teen, and my mom, G, and I are chilling in the living room watching TV. I have no idea how it gets brought up, but I recall the stairs dream and kinda laugh about it. My sister kinda just stares at me for a second and asked me if I was being serious. I said yes, of course, and she gets visibly disturbed and tells me that she has had the exact same dream. I know I never told her about it. I only mentioned it briefly to my mom. The more she asks for clarifying questions about the stairs, like the placement, how they looked, etc., the more my mom gets weirdly quiet. There's a bit of a lull in the conversation as my sister and I are a bit dumbfounded, and my mom pipes up and says that not only does she remember me telling her about the dream, which I hadn't even mentioned yet, but that my sister woke up in a similar daze a few days later and asked her the same fucking question. She said she remembered us insisting that there were stairs in that room on and off for years. She said she kind of just blew it off as us being weird and tried to forget about it because it kind of creeped her out. We all just kind of sat there, unsure what to think. The part that sticks out to me the most is that as I was trying to explain how I felt, my sister and I were kind of like finishing each other's sentences about how it just felt wrong, but that we needed to touch it, to walk up it. Shit gives me the chills. What freaks me out most about this one is, like they said at the beginning of the story, there's literally an unfinished upstairs section of this house that can only be accessed through the roof. Now, to be honest, I'm not really sure whether or not I believe in ghosts or spirits or whatever, but it sounds like there was almost like some sort of a presence upstairs that was like coaxing these kids to come up. So here is some background information. This summer, I went on vacation with my older sister and our parents. The house where we went had 2 floors, and we decided to invite 2 of our cousins for a sleepover. Our parents went to sleep in their room upstairs, and me, my sister, and my cousins had dinner downstairs. Before going to sleep, we played some normal sleepover games and then decided to play hide and seek in the dark. Such a stupid game, I know. We closed all the blinds and turned off the lights, so it was pitch black. I wanted to hide under a bed, but once I got near it, I felt something grab my leg. I didn't think much of it at first because one of my cousins always tries to scare me, so I thought it was him and asked him to stop. No answer, so I crouched down and tried to slide under the bed. But something was stopping me. It wasn't an object or something like that. It was warm and soft. I could clearly hear breathing and feel warm air on my face. I asked him to move because it was my spot, but again, no answer. My sister then came into the room and found me, so we turned on the lights. We were alone. My cousins were hiding in a different room of the house. They swear on their life that it wasn't them, and I can tell when they're being serious. To this day, I still can't explain it. Maybe I was tired since it was night, but I remember the feeling so vividly that I just can't convince myself it was only in my imagination. I just can't get over how confusing this must have been to go through directly. It sounds like this person was completely convinced that there was actually something under there with them. Now to recap, they said there was something warm and soft under the bed with them that grabbed their leg, and they could even feel its warm breath hitting their face. Now, the only sort of hypothesis I can offer for this story is the fact that maybe the warm air came from like a warm air vent underneath the bed. The only thing is, even if that is true, that doesn't explain the warm thing that was under there. This is a sort of glitch in the Matrix story that kind of confuses me more than scares me. When I was only around 4 or 5, my mother was good friends with the family that lived behind us, so every now and again, she'd take me there to play with their kid while she and the other grown-ups chatted. I remember so clearly going into their backyard, and the girl and I would play the travel game. The whole premise of the game would be that we'd both pretend to be tourists traveling from her house to mine through this gate that was built into the fence. However, one day, when we were doing this, we stepped into my backyard to travel, and the gate just kind of vanished into thin air, like it had fused into the fence or something. We were both too little to hop back over the fence, so we cried until both of our mothers came running out to see what happened. I can still remember the confused expression on their faces when they were carrying us into the house and asking us how we had gotten into our backyard. I said, through the gate. There was never a gate leading into my parents' backyard. The next time my mother came over, the girls and I were only allowed to play inside the house. The more I think about it, the more it weirds me out. Why would there even be a gate connecting 2 houses that were meant to be owned by separate people? I'm really into these sort of glitch stories where the rules of the world just seem to kind of bend, even if it's for just a quick moment. So if you do have any sort of strange or unexplainable experiences, you can submit them using the form link in the description. I'm actually running short on stories right now, so if you do have a good one, be sure to submit it and you actually have a pretty good chance of showing up on the channel. I was out on a hike with my friends, deep in the woods at night. We decided to do a moonlit hike, thinking it would be a fun and unique experience. As we walked along the trail, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. The trees seemed to loom over us, and the shadows seemed to shift and move. I tried to brush it off as my imagination, but the feeling only grew stronger. Suddenly, I hear a rustling in the bushes. My friends stopped and looked around, trying to see what was making the noise. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel a presence nearby. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel a cold sweat forming on my brow. Just as I was about to turn and run, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a tall, thin man with long, stringy hair and piercing eyes. His skin was pale and gaunt, stretched tight over his bones. He was dressed in rags that hung off his emaciated face, and his long, dirty nails looked more like claws. He had a wild, animalistic look in his eyes, as if he were on the hunt. I froze in fear, not knowing what to do. The man just stood there, staring at us with a sinister grin on his face. My friends tried to act tough, but I thought it was unnecessary and a bit stupid. The man didn't seem to hear or acknowledge them. It was as if he was completely focused on me. Then, in a voice that sent shivers down my spine, the man called out my name, but it wasn't just any voice. It was the voice of my dead grandpa. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could this man know my grandpa's voice? And how could he be using it to taunt me? I was very close with my grandpa, and hearing him speak in this man's voice brought up feelings of sadness and loss, but at the same time, I was terrified for my life. The man seemed to have some kind of supernatural power, and I didn't know what he was capable of. I tried to back away slowly, but my legs felt like jelly, and I couldn't move. The man took a step towards me, his eyes locked on mine. Just when I thought I was doomed, my friends grabbed me and pulled me away from the man. We ran as fast as we could, not stopping until we were back at the trailhead. As we collapsed on the ground, panting and out of breath, I knew that I would never forget that creepy encounter in the woods. The incident left me traumatized, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the man was still out there somewhere. I had nightmares about him for weeks, and every time we went outside, I couldn't help but look over my shoulder. I vowed to always be careful when exploring the wilderness. The memory of that night stayed with me, and I knew that I could never go back there. Ever. There was this dream I had when I was 7 or 8, which I still remember vividly to this day. I'm 29. My mom and I were at a hotel for a water park with a family friend and her daughter. Now, for context, I grew up extremely poor. Like, barely enough money to make it through the month poor, and I understood that even then. So I had no reason to believe that going to a hotel like that was even possible, let alone one with a water park. A couple years later, I want to say I was 10, my mom told me that we'd be staying a night at this fancy water park resort with the aforementioned family friend and daughter. At that moment, I didn't remember the dream that I had those years ago, but everything came rushing back the moment I entered that hotel room. Everything in the room was placed exactly the same. The walls were the same color, even the scent was the same. Then the friend's daughter said something that I remember her saying in the dream. "Doesn't feel real, does it?" For some reason, that sentence rattled me, and I told everyone about my dream. No one believed me, and they said things like, "Oh, it's normal to have a dream about something you're excited about." It's almost like they didn't hear me say I had the dream years ago. I pouted and spent most of the trip in the water park area. I've told many people this story, but only one person believed me, said I must have strong psychic abilities. I wouldn't go that far. It felt more like a glitch in the Matrix scenario to me.